Okay, hi everybody. So my name is Ali Bogard. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much for being flexible to this format. Me together with the studio, Sophia, you've heard her voice come in and out. They've been incredible hosts for me the last couple years. And what we did is we started running these 10-hour meditation immersions, both for people that are brand new to the practice. If that's you, welcome. And also for people with long-standing practices, people that have been in a meditation practice 20, 30 years have also joined this, because what the premise of these 10 hours that we use together is really both to dive into technique, but also to get into theory and into the nature of the mind. If you're a teacher, we start to get into some of the dynamics of brain science and the nervous system, so that you really get an understanding not only of what to do, but why the practice of meditation, why the practice of self-inquiry, contemplative meditation, more holding your mind to certain points of focus, why those are so beneficial. So we're going to get into the what and the why and the how. And, you know, when we've ran this over 2 days, over 10 hours, when we're talking about the most effective way to bring something that is so good in person to just the situation that we're in from afar, we thought it would be most helpful to break it into 2.5-hour chunks over 4 days. And so I'm sure you've learned this as you've written into the studio and signed up, but you are so welcome to join for any or all of the sessions. If you need to pop out or pop in, I get it. 2.5 hours, 2 days of your weekends for some of you is a lot. And so that being said, everything is going to be both video recorded and audio recorded. So you'll get 10 hours of content and then access to a bunch of other free meditations as we go. This format, I have taught publicly and in group for almost 16 years now. And you're going to have to be so patient with me and excuse so many things, because the way I've really learned how to teach is purely in person. So talking at a screen feels both two-dimensional, as well as I can't read how deeply you're sitting from afar, especially if we've got people in Australia. If we're in a group, I'm really reading the group nervous system and seeing where we need to go. So I'm going to do my very, very best. And with that, it's so much more fun to just not talk at a screen. So I love these experiences to be very interactive and to meet you with all of the information you want, so that this is as both rich and relevant for you as possible. For that, if you're brand new to Zoom, if you go to the bottom of your screen, or you just kind of click up and see all of those little icons, the chat icon is where you can write into some questions. Somewhere in there is the raise your hand. It's a little blue hand. That might work, but I've got 4 screens of participants. So it's probably best if you chat, or if it's something I'm just right in the middle of saying and you want to understand it better, you can unmute yourself and just say, hey, I have a question. So there's a bunch of us, but that will work just great, okay? So please interact with me. Let me know where we're going, how we're going. I'll do my very best to speak at a bunch of muted faces. It's as awkward at the best of times, but what I think we're all realizing is how quickly we can adapt. But what I really want to place, both for myself and my work at this time, is I want to adapt, but I don't necessarily want to normalize this, because I never want it to be too normal of experience to be seeing each other through such 1- and 2-dimensional screens. So I want to adapt and be flexible and make it great, but I don't ever want it to be normal to not be together, especially in the name of the practice and in the name of sitting together in wisdom and in teachings and in silence. What I would always love to do is start with an opening circle, and with that, each of you would tell us who you are and where you're from, and you'd let me know both where you're at in your practice, what plateaus you're hitting, or it seems to be just spinning the same information or the same dial over and over again. But with 70 people, that's going to be our whole weekend. So just know that I'd love to know you, and we'll get to know each other somewhat through this. Okay. The nature of these next 4 days, the 2 weekends split up back to back, what we're going to be doing is I really love to heavily load the content on the Saturdays. So this Saturday and next Saturday, it's going to be more theory-based in terms of when do you use certain practices for certain times. So there are focus-based meditations, and there's mindfulness. There's inquiry, where you start to really question the thoughts you're having, so that it's not just watching mind and thoughts pass. You're also running it through really contemplative and inquiry-based practices. There's creating desired experience, where you really hold on to certain thoughts or certain virtues. And so what I love to do on the Saturday of today and next Saturday is give the what and the how. And so we will certainly sit a couple times today. There'll be shorter sits. But then tomorrow, once I give you a bunch of theory of why things are certainly helpful and when do you want to do certain practices, tomorrow we're going to be leaning more heavily into less theory and more conversation and more meditation. So we certainly are going to meditate today, but I am going to load you up on some content, some context, and some theory. And then tomorrow we're pretty much going to meditate and then meditate and then meditate and then meditate, because what I've learned to do, my mom, she's on here, Penny Bogard. Hi Penny. What she did was she put me and my sister both in our first meditation class at about 17. My sister was 18 or 19 at the time, so about 22 years ago. And it took a little while for it to make sense and for me to catch on to what I even thought the concept of it was. But what I've learned to do over the last 20 plus years is deeply trust the practice. And so the theory and the content that I'll give you is really helpful because the mind loves to know why it's doing what it's doing. As soon as I say, this practice is going to boost your metabolism, regulate your hormonal body, and increase your ability to regulate maladaptive stressors, all of a sudden there's a part of the personality and the productive ego that sits with more attention and it pays more attention. As soon as it knows the benefit of what it's going to get, often it's willing to sit through the long stages of discomfort, distraction, and boredom that come with the practice. And so I like to teach both. I deeply trust what happens when you put the brain into quieter brainwave states and when you regulate the nervous system so that we don't dominantly charge our fight, flight, and freeze-based system. So as we go, I'll talk about the sympathetic versus the parasympathetic. I'll talk about the beta to the alpha to the delta to the theta brainwaves. I'll talk about what happens neurologically, physiologically, when we interrupt habitual thought and move it towards choice-based thinking. And that being said, I want to give you as much time where you're not just interpreting information, you're experiencing a state. Okay? And so I will teach like that as I go. Again, I'll encourage it over and over and over again to ask me so many questions. If you have a question and you feel like you're a brand new practitioner and you're a little insecure to ask a question, maybe it's too remedial or you know what the mind does as it judges itself, ask that question. With this practice, the simple and the basic is the most true. As we start to become more complex and we get into the nature of the mind and the nature of the delusions of the mind, the limited-based thinking and the way that the personality works, all that kind of stuff is my personal favorite. I love to go into that, and we're going to get into that. We're going to get into like the nature of the heart mind and those types of things. But there is no question that is too basic, that isn't some of the most greatest information you can offer up. So please be super willing to give anecdotes, give teachings, ask your questions, and I've got the group chat up, so I'll just see them come in as we go, okay? So to begin, we're going to do a little sit together, and then I'm going to start to get into the nature of meditation as a whole before I break it down into these variant components. And when I break it down into the variant components, the easiest way to explain that for newer practitioners is to liken it both to one's diet or to one's exercise regimen. If we're sticking with your exercise, the way that cardio impacts the body is so different from asana-based yoga, stretch-based yoga, or weight training, or Pilates or bar. All of the ways that the muscle group and the skeletal group both tone and stretch and structure themselves need a different level of exercise, impact, tension, and integrity. The same is true with different glands of the brain, different neurochemicals with the nervous system. And so what becomes really helpful is not only sticking with, a practice that you know very well, but also having access to some practices when you're in high states of anxiety, when you're having a hard time moving grief, when you cannot get other people's emotions out of your body, when you cannot lift your mind up out of very personal places. And so with the nature of these 10 hours, what I love to do is give you kind of the landscape of meditation so that when you need it, there's a tool. And the way I was taught, through so many really great teachers, is that teachings, especially when you start to get into kind of the spiritual and the mystical based side, teachings are only relevant if you can use them. Just like a key is only relevant if it's for the door you're right in front of. If you have one of those things that those New York superintendents have, those huge chains and there's a million keys on it, and he's the only person that knows every key. If you have that kind of situation with your practice where you never know what key to use where, then it's not helpful. And so as I give you some of the teachings, I'll give you how they work from a physiological, mental, emotional, and we'll get into some mystical and spiritual places as well, because all of them will correlate to a variant part of the body that you're touching. Because we're a mental body and an emotional body and a spirit body and a light body, we want practices that deeply affect and impact, as well as help us converse, help us learn the emotional body, help us learn the stress mind, help us learn the variant parts of our spiritual aspect. So we'll go with that as well. For this first sit and each sit thereafter, because I can't see you, some videos are off and you're lifted up, I'm going to very quickly give you an overview of the safest ways to sit. By the Sunday of our fourth time together, we're going to be in 30, 45-minute sits together. And so it's the most important that you're not really propped up, using a lot of musculature to support yourself and hold up, because that's going to keep you in too activated of a both brainwave state and neuromuscular state. But you also don't want to go into a total collapsed place where that edge of sleep is too hard to push off. Okay, and so if you are sitting, I'm gonna give you probably 4 or 5 options to sit. If you are sitting, the way I see my girl Shanice sitting there, where if you are seated without a wall, without a couch, you're on the floor, you've got your legs crossed. The most important thing for sitting cross-legged on the floor is to have your hips higher than your knees and have no floating knee. And what that means is if I'm sitting and my hips are tight and the knee is propped up like this, your psoas, the muscle right here, as it connects into the diaphragm back here, is going to pull psoas and diaphragm so tight, the way your breath will get short will limit your mind from being able to drop to a restful place. It's going to keep you in fight or flight. Also, the outer cruciate ligament of the knee, if you're in a 20-minute sit, it won't be a big deal. But if you've got a 10, 20-year practice of 30 minutes to 60 minutes, your knees are going to take the majority of the harm. If you are seated cross-legged and one leg goes numb, it's always the leg, pardon these angles, it's always the leg that's the most in, because you have the tightest closure of the knee joint and the most external rotation of your hip. So if you're seated cross-legged because you want to, build your core strength and build your attention, if your leg falls asleep, all you need to do is switch the cross of the leg or flex the foot so that you get a good dose of blood to the muscles, okay? If sitting cross-legged is really hard for you, then you sit on your knees. And on your knees, you can put a cushion underneath of you. And what that does is it helps your low back, your hips, and your knees from not rounding and collapsing, okay? I've had, a very long daily practice, and it's always seated on a floor upright. But in this, weird moment we're in, I've got a house full of people. I've been loving sitting against my bed backboard, stretching my legs out long, and just making it so comfortable. So if you want to go crawl into bed, if you're already in bed, I totally appreciate that. If you're on a couch, then just settle yourself back. And if your back is supported, we don't have to worry too much about your hips or your knees, okay? So wherever you are, go ahead and find the position that you want to try for our first shorter practice before I get into some longer theory, okay? All right. And as you sit, close your eyes. And take 10 or 15 seconds and fix or fidget yourself, even if it seems so ridiculous, the way your hair needs to lie or the way the clothing lies. Because just like when you're in a quiet room, how the tiniest little sounds become loud, when you sit still, it's the tiniest sensations that will become distracting. And what this also does as you fix and fidget yourself into comfort is it cues this really beautiful and tender response in the body to know that you care for its comfort. You so care for this body's comfort. And then you'll notice it doesn't take too long before the body actually starts to long for stillness. And so as you settle yourself in for the first probably 30 seconds or so, when I say things like that with time, I always take track of time. So for the next 30 seconds to about a minute, don't do anything. Especially if you're an experienced practitioner, don't reach for a technique or deepen your breath. Just let the inherent perfection of your heart beating, your breath breathing, your genius mind thinking not need to be fixed or imposed upon. Just a minute where you get to simply sit in your own presence, your own existence. With your eyes closed, look at the darkness behind your eyelids, that, screen of dark that also has this little dance of lightless light, this subtle light that emanates from some of the glands of the brain. And now figure out behind your closed eyes how to engage your peripheral vision, that wide, soft, deep eye. You'll feel the eyes settle back and almost energetically feel as though they drop down beneath your cheekbones. Now swallow and track that sensation as low as it will go. A wide, watery eye and the start of your digestion are two little clicks of your quiet nervous system into place. Keep your chest your jaw relaxed, soft, and still. And drop your attention down into all the tissue of your belly, beneath your ribs, above your pelvis. Where the ribs end, before your pelvis, your hip bones begin, all of that belly tissue that houses your vital organs. And as you breathe, have that be the only thing that rises on the inhale and falls on the exhale. So your shoulders and your jaw and your chest are relatively still. Let the profound simplicity of body breathing, conscious awareness feeling body breathing, let that profound simplicity capture your attention. And now, without moving your lips or your tongue, declare to yourself internally, now I turn inward. With whatsoever arises in thought, emotion, or memory, with whatsoever arises, I will be present with. Present to build a rich inner life, responsible, observed, rich inner life. For this practice is not here to comfort you, it's here to awaken you to you. And to also declare to yourself silently and quietly at the start of our time together. Move into the seat of and the awareness of studentship to my own mind. The layers of its distraction, the layers of its wound, and the layers of its depth and its wisdom. So in the seat of student, first and foremost, I suspend my knowing or the thinking that I know everything, requiring me to suspend my opinion of everything that arises, being met with judgment. You meet yourself first with an open landscape of curiosity. Widen and relax your eyes. And now as your belly breath fills down and wide on your inhale, much like when a balloon expands, the exhale is a very soft release of your belly back to the spine. The first imposition we'll make on the breath is take your inhale to a 3 and your exhale to a 3. For some of you, that's perfect. For others, you're welcome to go 4 in, 4 out. Even your in-breath to your out-breath, wide, soft eyes. So we'll regulate the hemispheres of your brain and your nervous system. So when we're doing breath work, you'll stay with my count of timing. For the mind, and the saboteur mind is going to give you every reason as to why you should shift or change. The emotional body and the breath are so intimately connected. So for my timing, regulate your in-breath and your out-breath to a 3 in or a 4 in, and the same out. Wide, soft eyes. Keep the even in-breath to out-breath, and now you're going to add a retention on both. And so what that means is that when you in, you then hold for the same length of time, out, and hold empty, like you're breathing all 4 sides of a box or a square. 3 or 4 in, 3 or 4 hold, 3 or 4 out, 3 or 4 hold. Stay with what you intend to be doing. Watch the nature of the mind move like wind, while a steadfast part of your focused attention just stays with what you intend to be doing, followed through to completion. And relax. Watch if you already have a mind that seems to know if you're doing it good or bad, right or wrong. Suspend duality like that. Curious of your experience. When you complete your next full round of this box breathing, just bring that to a close and simply sit quietly with your eyes closed. Darkness behind your eyelids again. Wide peripheral vision. Now feel the weight of your head heavy and relaxed into the support of your neck designed to support your head. A wave of extraordinary softness comes across your face, so all mask, personality, and role relaxes from your face. Head and neck heavy and relaxed into your shoulders, which are designed to support head and neck. The weight of your head, your neck, and your shoulders fall into the support of your spine. Each joint of your spine designed to support everything above it. Head and neck, shoulders and spine weight heavily and fall into the deep support of your hips, your pelvis evolutionarily designed to support everything above it. And then do that all again from the top of your head, just falls into this infrastructure, this network of support, down into the floor, the couch that supports you, down into the earth that supports that. And regardless of the mental or the emotional story that you're in at this time, feel for 1 uninterrupted minute the incredible network of support that is factually here for you. So little you need to do to hold yourself up. So for 1 mere minute, you can relax your mind, relax the future, relax your heart, relax the past. Relax your muscles into the support of bones and earth. And for this last minute, quietly, inside of the intimacy of your own self, set your intention, your prayer, or your desire for the door that you're opening with this next number of hours together. Find that seed of intent, that seed of prayer, that request from your conscious mind to your higher mind and plant it like a seed in fertile soil. Some of you are looking for a deep peace of mind. For others, you're looking to know the nature of the self. For others, you're looking to awaken the love that's inside. Plant it. Now for 10 seconds, it's so slight. Let no distraction interrupt it. Just hold it until you feel the energetic feeling, like the signature imprint of the intent with which you join us today. To the darkness of your eyelids again, deepen your breath into your belly. Take another inhale right away into your chest. Hold full. Let your body and your brain absorb that. And then open your mouth, and with a sigh no one can hear you, you can exhale and release. Do that again. It's an inhale right away to another inhale, belly to chest. Get tall, get wide, get dimensionally spherical, really full, hold. Brain and immune system absorbs. And then exhale and release. Very gently you can open your eyes. And whatever needs to move can move. If you are choosing to get some notes written throughout our time together, then you're welcome to have the notebook close. And one thing I really recommend is to even just right as soon as I say it, you can take a note of the technique we do. I'll usually explain it after. And then, either any questions or experiences. That is just an opening technique. I'm not going to talk about it much because there's so many other things to get into. Of course. So as we go, you're so welcome to send in a question. That's where you'll kind of see me do this little weird thing because somebody's written a question. Or you can just say, hey, I have a question, and I'll unmute you because I'd rather hear your voices than mine for 2.5 hours. What we say through across almost every discipline in meditation, it's the biggest question that people have because there are some techniques that really encourage you only stick with their technique. And that's a beautiful thing. We liken it to the way one looks for water. You dig one deep well, and the depth of that well creates this wellspring of information and resources for you. When you go and dig a bunch of tiny holes and then say there's no water here, it's often purely just distraction, a distracted mind saying there's no wisdom for me here. So if you have a technique that you love or a tradition that says stick with this, I highly respect that and I really revere it and I recommend it. But what often happens, and why I teach the way I do and why I've learned the way I have, is Meredith, I'll answer that one moment. Why I teach the way I do is that so many times people will come to different teachings, different techniques, different teachers. And if one isn't giving them their particular mantra or teaching it the way they learned or the way their teacher learned, they will have a harder time, or they'll express a more difficult time dropping into silence. And then what happens is the technique, whether it's repeating the mantra or following the breath or doing a very particular visual technique, then the technique becomes the thing somebody really specializes in, not the state of mind and the state of consciousness that the technique is meant to drive you towards. The technique is always the vehicle. When I start to introduce mantra-based meditation, the repetition of a word very lightly to hone the mind, mantra translates from Sanskrit into vehicle for the mind. Like Tantra, you've heard of in yoga, that is the vehicle to stretch. The Tantra is to stretch the mind. The mantra is to drive the mind. But then when somebody becomes less interested in where that technique takes them to, and they become just really proficient at the technique, then what we're missing is an entire experience of brainwave state and conscious state that one can access through heart-based meditation or prayer or mental inquiry. And so why I teach this program the way I do is to say, here are the tools, here's where they're useful, here's their physiological, neurological, and emotional effect, so that you can use them when you need them. So when I overview the course like that, I'm going to be giving sometimes, like tomorrow, we might run through 4 or 5 techniques. And that might be a lot, where I'm taking you, focusing on different things, letting go of different things. When you leave here, you might choose one of them and stay with them for 30, 40, 60 days to really see the cause and the effect. But the biggest thing that you'll want access to is just as many tools as you need, Sometimes you need a hammer, sometimes you need a screwdriver. But what my first teacher always said is that, if you need to hang a picture on a wall and you go to like a home hardware store, a Home Depot, you're not actually looking to buy a drill. You're needing or looking to find a hole. And so sometimes people just like focus on the tool, but they forget what they need the tool for. And some of you guys have been with me for years and years and years, and so you've heard some of these teachings again and again, but I'll have to remind you that where you're in now is always a new moment. And so the practice of the technique that really worked with you before, we're going to have to learn how to listen and check in and speak the language of the body, the emotion, the mind, the stress, the fear, to know what is the need, what is the super tender need underneath of it that is asking to be fulfilled. Okay? Because, I've learned how to teach in person and feedback, I'm going to assume that what I'm saying makes sense, because usually I'd ask, like, that makes sense, are you with me? But I can't, because it's just me talking at you. So again, use the chat box if you're like, huh? Just works too. Okay. Across many different disciplines, what we'll say is that the practice of meditation, right now it's gotten so deeply confused because the way meditation needs to be communicated about to really get that like why somebody would want to practice is it's really been communicated from a place of how it will make somebody more productive, how it will reduce stress or increase sleep. And so the way it's talked about are the benefits. And that can be really confusing because when somebody is starting a practice, the benefits seem so unapparent because to sit still, even though we take the outer posture, the composure of what looks like stillness, you'll know as well as I do that as soon as you take attention to the observation of the mind, what you will not see is stillness. You will see the chaotic, random, labyrinth nature of the mind. And so what becomes really important is to understand how the practice of meditation really works, that I want to get into first, so that it starts to suspend that first point of judgment of pretty much what was really dominantly programmed into a lot of us that were educated in a Western way. And what I mean by that is it's really based off of progression. You go from grade 1 to grade 2, grade 2 to grade 3, and it's based off of a pass or a fail system. And so the way most of us learned how to learn things was linear and progressive and through the lens of duality, good, bad, right, and wrong. Okay? So when we approach that linear, dualistic nature of the mind or nature of the studentship to meditation, it creates an incredible amount of excess thought that doesn't need to be added on. And what I like to do, even if people are really experienced practitioners, is start a course like this in explaining what meditation is actually doing for the subconscious mind and the cellular memory. And so that we can begin with that beginner's mind. Even, 22 years into a practice, 40 years into a practice, you'll hear people speak again and again of the mind that's becoming ever more new, ever more now. It's a mind that has learned again and again to suspend its constant opinion of what it knows is good or bad, right or wrong, so that the ego personality can feel, I'm doing it right, I'm good, I'm doing it wrong, I'm bad. Because if your meditation is keeping you in a constant loop of evaluating yourself through those premises, then the studentship from a child is not being updated to the wisdom of the studentship of learning the nature of the mind. When we go to sit, many people say, so those of you with a long practice, you know this, but as I'm teaching, if it's stuff that you already know, suspend your knowingness and go into reflection of, is that still true for me? So you're always doing this really beautiful check of like, that's still true? Is that still true? When somebody is just starting to sit, people will say, I find really meditative experiences in cooking or dancing or running or in art. And those are beautiful practices to hit flow state. You can hit incredible states of low beta and alpha. I'll explain that as we go. When you get into repetitive muscle memory, that starts to stabilize your emotional body, and you can have really transcendent and expansive experiences. But to engage in a meditative practice while you're still doing something doesn't let you clear as many maladaptive stressors as possible, because you're still navigating the outer world. You're running and you're navigating traffic. You're dancing and you're navigating music. You're cooking and you're navigating temperature. So you can hit flow state, but you won't get as much of a clearing of old cellular, ancestral, karmic patterns that happen when we sit still and don't have the muscular body engaging with the apparent outer world. Okay? And every now and again, do one of these, so I can see that it makes sense. It's I love being with you, but it's really awkward, I gotta tell you. So when we sit still, when somebody starts to build a practice of stopping, it's so that the dominant musculature that keeps us in personality, masking, all of that can start to soften to see what really has not been processed. And so this thing is a closed loop system. Like the earth is a closed loop system. Like your fridge is a closed loop system. What I mean by that is when you buy food for the fridge, the food has to go into the fridge, and then it either needs to be eaten or be thrown away. You know that you can't just keep putting more food in the fridge. Everybody during quarantine has tried, And so when you realize that this is a closed loop system, the mental body and the emotional body cannot just keep ingesting. And so, we'll go from a deep sleep. You'll wake up, you'll grab your phone, you're inundated by news and emails, and then you go into your relationships and you're inundated by unprocessed emotions and things you haven't said and past resentments. And then you move through your day and you watch TV and you take in the news and you're with your kids, and it's just ingesting. Maybe not just actual food, but the thoughts and the emotions and the interactions start to have to be digested by this system. If things aren't taken out by way of processing, emotional processing and mental processing, therapy is an amazing way to do it. Talking to good friends, amazing way to do it. Exercise, amazing way to do it. Yoga and spirit-based practice is an amazing way to do it. But those all involve an engagement. And so when you're looking at clearing the amount of information stored in every single cell, what's stored in the body, what's stored in the subconscious mind, the extraordinary library of the subconscious mind, what we need to do is sit without as much input coming in, so that all the things we didn't feel, the thoughts we didn't process, the inner criticism we weren't paying attention to, those can come to the surface to see, is this something that needs to be taken out of the fridge? Do we eat this or do we throw this away? And so I know I'll flip metaphors so many times. It's like a personal teaching style. Bear with me. When we go to sit, what happens if somebody's a new practitioner and they don't understand the nature of how this works, they will sit and it'll be a bunch of distraction. It'll be a very chaotic mind. it will have no rhyme or reason. I'll teach you next weekend why the mind binds some things together. You know, why you'll see a certain car and it'll take you back to when you were 8 years old, and it'll trigger an emotion. We'll get into that next weekend. But when you go to sit, if you haven't sat quietly for a while without stimulus, without taking care of other people, without being obsessed with the worlds of how the world sees you, when you get to just sit, what'll happen without all of that stimulus in is all of the stimulus that was neither processed nor transmuted, it comes to the surface to see, do you still need it? Do we eat this? And so when somebody is a new practitioner and they go to sit and it doesn't look like what they thought this composed, quiet, serene thing is, they will go into that linear progressive educational model and they'll say, I'm bad at this, I can't do this. But what they don't know is they might have just gotten a huge charge of release of what are either maladaptive stressors you took on to adapt to your environment, not in a helpful way, or it's stored emotion and memory that couldn't move otherwise, or it's beliefs that are no longer relevant for your current belief system. Okay. So I'm going to add one more point, and then I'm going to ask you to give me a little bit of feedback so that we're on the same page. So when somebody goes to sit and they're sitting quietly without stimulus, and that instant part of the mind is just noise, logistics, what am I going to eat later, where am I going to go? That is just going to be part of the nature of the logistical beta mind that is very importantly interested in self-preservation and self-protection. You do not want that to stop. But what becomes really powerful about this practice is knowing which thoughts you get to choose and which thoughts just get to be there. We're not trying to stop or cessate the quality of the mind. But then as we start to dip to lower brainwave states, all of the things that are governing our behavior, both physically our reactions, emotionally our reactions, mentally our reactions, those slowly start to bubble to the surface by way of memories, opinions, random thoughts. They don't have a lot of linear progression to them. When those are coming up to the surface, if the first thing that they meet is judgment or criticism, judgment and criticism carry an incredible amount of knowing. And I'm going to put like knowing, not like the high knowing, but like the I know. They carry such high amount of knowing to them that emotional charge says, I still need it. And so one of the first practices I'm going to teach is the importance of non-judgmental awareness, to stay as open-minded and curious as possible. Because if something comes up like, I'm no good at this, I'm a bad mom, there's too much work to do, life is not working out for me, I didn't do that right. If somebody is meeting their meditation through their old studentship of when they were growing up, then I'll just stick with one thought, like, I'm doing this wrong. Non-judgmental awareness, what I'm going to teach next, that doesn't engage. So we don't have the ability to just sit with, not react, and hold that thought. The knowingness quickly goes in and starts to create an emotional chain of reaction. I'm never good at this. I don't follow through with things. I've never been good at things. It starts to create this tripwire of personality and emotion and stress. And now what might have been a release of an old worthless pattern all of a sudden gets confirmation, like, I still need that, I believe it, and then it stores it again. Okay? And so when I start a course like this with non-judgmental awareness first, I'll teach in a moment, it's to create as spacious of a landscape as possible, that just like when a good friend or your child comes to you and says, hey, I want to tell you something, you begin by listening. Open-hearted, open, non-judgmental. Yes, tell me everything. Tell me everything. And when we can take that approach with the inner landscape, you will get so much more clearing out of your electrical body, your nervous system, your communicative body, out of your old stored memory. because it's not being met with judgment and criticism. You know how it feels. I'm sure you know how it feels in relationship when you go to share something with someone. Ugh, I'm feeling worthless. And they say, yeah, you've always been worthless. When that's the outer relationship, you start to protect, guard, hold, and think that's who you are. But when that's the only company we ever meet inside, this constant knowingness, and the knowingness is really intense and critical, then somebody will go to their meditation and they don't want to sit because it's just like creating more structures of abuse everywhere. And so I really want to begin our time together with both the nature of how meditation works, of clearing stored memory. Every cell in the body, yes, it's mostly space, an extraordinary amount of space. We'll talk about that as we go. But in that space is encoded cellular memory, libraries of the past, libraries of not only your past, ancestral past, collective past. And so when things come up and they're met first with, fascinating, I can hold that, I can be with that. Then what that does is it starts to create an opening in the body, the whole body mind, to settle into a deeper level of questioning of whatsoever arises, I can be with, I can look at. Okay. I started this thought, so as you get to know me more, you'll know that I have a very circuitous mind. It'll go in many places, but I never drop a thread. So I might open a thread now and I might close it in 4 days. I'll never drop a thread, but the nature of my mind, I'll just kind of open doors and go in it. You'll catch on quickly. Linz, I don't drop a thread, right? I might pick up a thread from a year ago, but I've remembered it. The thread I opened 20 minutes ago that I wanted to bring back is that, thanks, Linz, is that across many disciplines, we'll say that the practice of meditation is like two sides of a coin, or two sides of a sword, or two sides of the moon. On one side, it's about purely being with what is. That's what I was just talking about, the non-judgmental awareness. I'm a really relational-based person. My family, we're really relational-based. So I teach a lot through this metaphor of relationship, because to me, yoga and meditation is purely the practice of intimacy, relationship. And so I like to use that experience a lot, because people can usually understand what it means to be in an abusive relationship with another, to understand what it means to be in an abusive relationship with their inner dialogue. And so sometimes I'll externalize it to make the point of the internalization. And so you know what it's like in relationship when somebody is able to just be with what you're going through. Not trying to fix it, not trying to say they know better, not trying to make the conversation about them. Oh yeah, I went through that too. They just know how to be with it as it is. This happened. Yeah, this is happening. You know, those friends are like, they're like gold, those friends that know how to just be with an experience. And so on one side of the coin, or one side of the moon of meditation, and the first side, so this is one of the few times I'm going to speak in a linear progression. One of the first things we need to learn how to do is sit in the non-judgmental awareness of being with what is, that makes us suspend our quick opinion. Let me just see. Let me just see. Let me just see. And once we incorporate that practice, that will be the next practice we do again. Once we incorporate that, the second side of the coin, after we've learned how to be with what is in some traditions, they use the word aggressively. I teach that way, and people get upset because they don't like the word aggression, because they haven't yet understood the nature of the mind. They're just making it about old aggression. So I'll say actively, but I will go back to that, not in a violent way, but in what a battlefield the mind can be sometimes. We'll say that on one side it's learning how to be with what is, and the other side it's about actively building virtue. When I start to teach you about the nature of the neurochemistry, the nature of rewiring the brain, the nature of how the neurons wire and fire together to create really dominant personalities and beliefs, and how we change that, that part will make sense. So what I'll say, because I'm not going to teach that part just yet, on the second side of when we're actively building virtue, it's because we become what we give ourselves to. In the mystical tradition, it said we become the gods we worship. The energies, the thoughts, the people, the environments you give yourself to shape how you feel about yourself, how you see yourself. When I teach you about the thalamus gland and the thymus gland and the nature of like how we know the self, it's crazy to see that the way you see me helps me see me. I'll get into that day 3. Okay? In science, not just metaphysics. And so when we're actively building virtue, that's the practices when we go into held states of forgiveness and compassion. That's when we give ourselves to gratitude to trigger your neurochemical body into fullness, not constant depletion. And you know that the exercises you do for your physical body build tone and core and cardio. You know the foods you eat build iron and vitamin K and calcium. And so then you'll know that when we give ourselves to the neurochemistry of gratitude, the serotonin, the dopamine, and the amount of immune system that opens when the body is not in fight or flight, it's the same chemical body. And so sometimes we have to just sit with our bad mind, sit with our bad self, sit with our grief, let grief be as it is, let anger and rage and jealousy be as it is. And then once we've practiced that, then we actively steer the mind into an upward state. Because again, the chemistry that we most practice will be the chemistry that we become. We'll get into that with epigenetics, and I want to, again, kind of bounce between the scientific, the metaphysical, the spiritual, the emotional, because it is all one system, all right? So I'm going to stop talking at you right now. I'm going to see what questions come through here. And I love a debate. If you're smarter than me, I hope you're way smarter than me. Push back. If you know more, if you have information, do that. If you're lost, do that. If you want different information, do that. But give me a little bit of feedback. Yeah, and Highland, I'm going to get you just to unmute yourself and ask everybody so that it's more personal.
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yeah, hi, honey. Nice to see you.
Hi. Okay, so my question is about if you have like a really potent emotion or feeling that's kind of consuming you, say it's, I don't know, anger or fear, are there times when it's, I mean, I don't want to say better or worse because that's the duality you were talking about, but when it moves you best to move through it rather than sit with it, whether, you know, just sitting in the meditation is what you want, or if it's like more of an active processing?
Wonderful question. I love that question. So I'm going to give it back to you and make sure that I've got it in the nature of the intention of what you're asking. So what I'm hearing is the question is, how do we know when we've sat in an experience long enough to really be with it, let it process, let it teach us what it wants to teach us, let it in before we let it go and change it? So both, what's the length of time? What's the depth of experience? Am I getting it? You can ask it back.
More so like when an emotion has taken you so much that sitting with it, you only get through the superficial layers of it.
Yes.
And that you don't know if, like, I don't know, maybe I need to box or scream, or like I can't get through it just by sitting because it's not moving in the way that I think I need it to.
Okay, great. So the answer to the question is actually inside the question. So with the emotional body, if an emotion is lasting longer than 90 seconds, it is triggering an old story. We've registered that and measured that. And so I want to distinguish between emotion and emotionality. Okay, so an emotion is an extraordinary amount of energy that moves through the body, the way this wind is moving through this desert valley, the way a storm comes in and moves snow or rain through. It's an important part of our ecosystem to move what's stagnant and keep us alive and vital and vibrant and sexual and sensual and awake, that emotional body. You know that when emotions have been repressed, suppressed, denied, it's like a lake that's turned into a swamp. It's brackish. It doesn't have movement of river to ocean. And so when you've been sitting in an emotion, and Hyland's question is, when do I know to I can't just sit in this emotion anymore. It's not giving me any information. I need to box or kick or scream or move. That's an incredible way of cathartically starting to turn the blood and the hormones of the body to move. When an emotion triggers into emotionality, the best way I could explain this is when you're with somebody that you really love, you feel them so empathically in your tissues, and they're having a real release, whether it's of joy or grief, and you can feel it with them. It's almost like you get goosebumps too. You can feel how alive that energy is moving. And then all of a sudden, you're with them, you're so present, you can feel that energy has so much potency to it. And then something almost goes a little numb. You can't feel them anymore, but they're still really crying. What's happened is that emotion that just was probably like a release, somebody didn't choose to love you, they couldn't love you, that moves. That emotion is so beautiful and important, that storm moves through. But then something inside of the old unprocessed mind, the old story that still thinks it's the true story, gets hooked. And now all of a sudden, that pain of being, say, left, not loved, triggers a story in the personality that says, and I'll never be loved again, and no one will ever love me, and I never loved anybody, and that was my only chance at it, whatever is the story. And now all of a sudden, that emotion starts to turn into an emotionality, and what was about to be processed and released starts to get stored, just like what I was talking about with the meditative mind. And so then, Hyland, when you're with something and you're kind of mining it for its depths, I'm going to take you through an emotional process either at the end of today or start of tomorrow to really answer Hyland's question. But when you're really sitting with an emotion and you're not getting any new information as to why you do what you do or how to get through it, it's time to change the point of consciousness with which you're approaching it. So if it's lasted longer than 90 seconds, it's no longer pure emotion, and now it's moved into a story that you'll either have to question or process. If you're questioning and processing, I'll teach you a technique. But if in the questioning and processing, you're still kind of like swimming around the information you've already got, you need to come at it from a different body. So what I mean by that is, when I spoke at the beginning and I said, there's the physical body and the mental body and the emotional body, Hyland's answer was in the question, sometimes the anger needs to move like fire, chaotic, random, punch, not anything, just air, it needs to move in that dynamic way. If something's really not moving your emotional body, meet it from the physical, go to the intellectual, or go to the prayer, the spirit body. And so see how long it's taken you. See if you're not getting any new information. And if it's not moving, change the body with which you're approaching it. Move it physically through strong exercise or deep rest or deep care. Move it emotionally through talking it through with somebody. Move it mentally by going into inquiry that I'm going to teach you on next Saturday. Or move it through prayer. Ask for some higher part of your intelligence to help you see something more differently, more clearly. And so that's when you're asking, how do we know when it's time to approach it or we've sat with it long enough? You're not getting any new information and it's not moving because this body wants digestion. It never eats food and holds onto it unless there's inflammation. It's the same with your emotions and it's the same with limited thinking. And so try that. How's that, Hyland?
That's very helpful. Thank you.
Okay, so you track time, and I'm going to give techniques that I haven't totally given in these courses before. It's because I know some of you guys take these a number of times over, and I want it to be, more information. That will be both emotional processing and how to change the body that we're seeing it from. sometimes we need to turn an emotion into pure sensation. I'll talk about this as we go, but what we do is we feel emotion, and the first thing that it hits is the I know mind. I've been here before mind. This is anxiety mind. Oh, this is anxiety. We didn't sit with it sensationally or in curiosity long enough to say, am I just thirsty? Is this excitement? Is this a piece of integrity? Like, what is this? We jump so fast to knowing what the sensation or emotion is. And now if it's anxiety, for example, if I feel a little tremble in my gut, it might be digestive, it might be picking up my surroundings, it might be foretelling what's coming, this body, this genius body that is communicating so profoundly on so many levels. My mind went into, I know what it is because I know what the past was. And if I know what the past is, I can already predict what the future will be. That's what the mind will do. And so now what felt like anxiety, now I didn't question it long enough to see if it even is anxiety. I didn't sit with it as pure sensation. I just made it anxiety, and now I'm going where I took anxiety in the past. Oh, I need to take my anti-anxiety pill. Oh, I need to go for a run. Oh, I need to pick up my device. We didn't sit long enough with it in the non-judgmental awareness to even ask a question like a good friend. Okay? So we'll certainly get into that. When Hyland asked that question, I was on the tail end of being with what is, actively changing virtue. What people try to do is they try to let go before they've let in. So a thought is obsessively coming at them, and anxiety is trying to speak to them like an alarm bell going off saying there's smoke in the room. And they just try to let it go. Like, you don't go and turn the fire detector off. You go and double check, is there smoke? When an alarm is going off, the first thing you do is check why. You don't go just dismantle the alarm. And so oftentimes people have a hard time letting go of obsessive thoughts and hard emotions because they haven't yet gotten the need that's really coming from what those were triggering in the body. And I'll teach you that as we go. Okay, I've got a few questions here. So, Jared, I think I answered it. Are all people capable to sink in with emotional or physical trauma? So absolutely, because all people, there is no person that is more wise than any other person. It is the same cellular structure, and this body is mostly related to plant matter. When you look at the extraordinary amount of research of how this works more like mycelium or fungus than it does even like some animal, then you remember the incredible adaptive ability of this body to heal when it's given to healing properties. When you want to heal, you have to give yourself to healing energies. And so sometimes people are trying to heal heavy states of emotional or physical trauma by infusing themselves back in the state of emotional or physical trauma that created them. And that's usually why somebody will create a story of I can't sink in, because what's happened to them has become who they are. And now the experience and the identity become so commingled that they can't hold a possibility of a self that isn't the story or the history. And so when we get into mental inquiry, this is a meditation course, but my work is really the nature of the mind, to really understand how the nature of the mind works. And so I go back and forth. I hope that's okay. But what'll happen is the thing that happened. I was abused. I was abandoned. I was left. What happened becomes who I must be. I was worthy of being left. I'm a person that should be abandoned. And then the way we replicate that in our relations and our behavior starts to create such a convincing argument. And so, I'll usually liken it to somebody that's not in a practice of actively knowing the self or the mind. So somebody that's not having this conversation that we are, they typically take the seat, their ego They're genius. I don't care how high somebody scores on like a Mensa test. The ego of every person, even if you think you're dumb, is the smartest thing you will meet. It's crafty, it's manipulative, it's slippery because it wants to protect itself. It wants to endure. It knows your trick. It knows your number. You built it. It knows you. And so what it'll do is it'll become a lawyer trying to make evidence for its case, even if it's, a defense attorney defending somebody that was wrong. It will get all the evidence to bring to the judge and the jury to say, look, I'm worth being left. Look, I'm worth being abandoned. Look, life doesn't work out for me. I do it every day. And so when somebody is sitting more in non-judgmental awareness, that lawyer is not interested in being like the judge and the jury. Let me see some facts. Let me see some different information. Let me see some different evidence. Let me see, is that universally true? And so when somebody can't sink in, it's because the trauma has not only taken a hold of the body, it's taken a hold of the identity. And now to hold a vision of the self that is not what happened to me, the identity is more about what I did with what happened. And that's not even a full picture of who this self is, you see? And so, before we get into really transcendent states of mind, I want to go there too with you, but that's more next Sunday. We also want to get into this place that says like, okay, if I'm just trying to learn myself and I've only told the story of how I was abused or how I was left or how I failed or how I wasn't smart, or there's not many stories, infinite play on finite stories. What's a really helpful exercise is to not say, what happened to me is who I am. Let me go find out what I did with what happened. Who'd I help? What I study? What I learn? What I give my mind to? Who did I try to forgive? What did I heal through it? Go find out that part of the pie to then get that part of the identity that can sink in a little bit deeper than the trauma. Okay? And non-judgmental awareness, we're going back to that. Okay, if I can discover being with what is. So, Dav, I might get you to unmute yourself because I always love to hear from you. Yeah, can you just give that to the crew, Dav?
Sure. So, I don't know if you can see me, I don't know whether that matters. So I'm so aligned with everything that you're saying. And when you talked about a linear way of being, we're always driving towards something. And maybe what we can learn is to stand in a future. Now, given where we are right now, which is very uncertain, we don't know what that future is even going to look like. But we can still create the possibility of that future, and we can still stand there.
Yes.
Can that have that future occur as a possibility?
Yes.
And then life show up to support us on that journey to the future. Does that make sense?
It's perfect. It exactly makes sense. And from a neurochemical point of view, from a nervous system point of view, what Dav is just saying there is that being with what is that ability to not get triggered, emotional, and reactive, to then actively build virtue. Because what happens is when he's saying here we can create a future, when we sit in the gratitude space, the compassion space, the manifesting space that we're certainly going to do together, we start to create a neural network and a magnetic and vibrational framework that starts to move us in the direction of a desired experience. When you are stuck in trauma of the past, why it recreates is because this is a vibrational and magnetic field. It keeps drawing to it the thing that it most relates to. It's the most familial. The most familial and familiar, it just keeps grooving. It's like, why am I here again? And so when Dav is saying we learn to be with is, and then we build a future, it's that manifesting language of be with what is, and then build yourself a new experience. Because then the nervous system always goes and seeks what it thinks is familiar. And so when you upgrade your love, you upgrade your compassion, you upgrade that level of normalcy that feels like healing, the body can only call in more of what it's regulating and normalizing. So you're exactly right there. It's so beautifully said. Court Fitzgerald, so is emotionality a hybrid of personality and emotion because the mind starts to identify the emotion as something that is there because the narrative? Exactly. And this plays out, so the question there is that emotionality I was talking about is when the emotion and the personality are really fueled by a self-narrative, a self-story that hasn't been sat with long enough, questioned long enough to really find the truth underneath of it. When you learn to meditate and you start to increase the gap of space between stimulus and reaction, that little aperture of space is what we call choice, or what we call you, okay? It's the place where you're not just responding the way your guardians did, your mom did, your inner self-hatred did. That stimulus to reaction, when there's no space, you know those people, they're scary. They don't have any ability to drive their car. It's scary because you don't know if they're going to be able to discern the best thing to do for them in the moment. When you're really angered or heated and it's just reaction, you don't have choice, you only have past. I'll talk about that in the nervous system. But when we've sat in meditation, we've sat in observation long enough. I'll get us back into practice in a moment. We've sat in it long enough to build the aperture of space between stimulus and response, choice. In that little moment, right, that little gap, it's this place that something more true, more authentic can come in and say, I don't want to be like that. He might be having a hard day. He's not my dad. You know, like that little gap lets the discernment tripwire the choice. Okay? And it's in that narrative that starts to really open space from emotionality. It doesn't happen consciously. This happens cellularly and chemically. That's why consistent daily practice is so important, because the nervous system, it operates best when it knows what to expect. Otherwise, it goes constantly into preparing for the past. And so if it knows, okay, we're going to sit every day, we're going to sit every day, we're going to sit in silence every day, we know what to expect every day, it starts to have space for a new experience. Okay? I've got Sharon. How do we know what is ours and what is someone else's story past when we're holding a lot of space for others and we're a container for so many other emotions? When we get into the emotional body and into kind of the boundaries around it, I'm going to talk exactly about that. So I will get you to ask me the question again, but I've also got it in my mind, and I'll talk about that with the emotional body. Okay? And then to Misty, so one person asked if your feet, because we're going to go sit again, if your feet are dangling from the floor, it is best in a chair to have your feet propped up by a brick or a book or a ottoman, because a dangling foot can really be hard on your psoas. Okay? And do I personally find a particular time of day best to drop into meditation? No matter what, as soon as I get out of bed, before I check my phone, that's always the time to sit. But I'm going to talk about that when I talk about building you guys a self-practice at the end of this. Okay? So I'll come back to that. Sitting on the floor better than a chair. Nothing is better than anything else. It's what lets you feel like you're not propping or holding yourself up. I love a chair because back support really helps my hip flexors. But if I'm really needing to build like some mental clarity, I sit my ass down on the floor. You know, if I'm getting wayward, I put myself in more discipline. You know, this sometimes this can be pretty relaxing. Nadia, I love you. Okay, so we are going to sit again. I'm going to stop